your animal intuitive and sensitive and Reiki master practitioner with animal love languages and your friendly neighborhood host of this podcast, Let's Talk to Animals. Today, for episode 4 of season 4 of our show, I'm taking a little detour. If you've been keeping up with the first few episodes of this season, which is slightly different than the 3 seasons that preceded it, and that I'm kind of stepping out from behind my little hostess badge, doing a lot of listening, doing a lot of learning. And now I've decided for season 4 to kind of step out a little bit more into the spotlight, if you will, and share some of what I've learned over the last 3 seasons and share what I teach when I teach animal communication, and share some of the insights and wisdom that I draw from when I'm mentoring humans and their animal companions. And so if you watched the last episode where we talked about the number one key, the thing you absolutely must do and ideally do first before you really take that deep dive into playing with interspecies communication across species boundaries, you also learned that I recently lost my soulbird, Pearl. And when I say lost, I mean he departed his physical body, and it happened very suddenly. It was very unexpected. It devastated me. I howled so loud that our dog ran out of the house. He started to howl, and then he ran out of the house as I circled around and around and around and around with my precious little angel's feathery body in my hands. And I howled like I have never howled before in my life. And it was such a shock. And I share this for a couple reasons. One, because if you're listening to this and you've lost an animal, it's so easy for us to shame ourselves for how we react. And I certainly have had a couple of go-rounds with that myself. Oh, Shannon, you're an animal communicator. You're a Reiki master. You're 52. You're this, you're that. Surely you would have, been able to muster up at least a tidbit, a morsel of Zen calm. No, there was none of that to be found. And what I can share with you is that any reaction that spontaneously arose from you or is arising from you now as you adjust to the absence of your wonderful pet's amazingly wonderful and comforting body, any reaction is authentic and to be honored. It's what your body, it's what your mind, it's what your emotion, what your heart, what your soul, what your spirit needs to do to survive that moment. And so that's the first reason I want to share this initial reaction with you. Is the second reason is because as we embark on unfolding our own intuitive gifts, it's always a joy for me to connect with animal guardians, animal carers, pet parents, foster parents to interspecies family members. But really my deeper goal with every connection that I make with the human animal, with you, with your animals, is to help you unfold your own intuition. I dream of a world where we all communicate freely and easily, regardless of species. I believe that this is the only way we are going to save the planet that we reside on, the planet that we need, the planet that now needs us. And so every single little challenge or obstacle or opportunity that crosses your path in your interspecies family is also an invitation, an opportunity to do that. And one thing I have learned through the suddenness and the shock of Pearl passing is that developing our intuitive abilities, our innate intuitive abilities, our inbuilt, inborn intuitive abilities is not a prescription that gets us out of the experiencing the uncomfortable symptoms of grief. I thought, maybe I wrote a whole book. I mean, I've been dealing with this since, I don't know, I was born, I think. And when my animals die, it seems to hit me harder than even when human animals that I love die. And with Pearl, because we have such a special story, and we were bonded from, minute one when we met, and such an improbable love story. And I started really struggling with worrying about Pearl dying. And I used to joke with him and say, where you go, I go. So if you go, I'm going. I'm either going with you, or I'm going to go and I'm going to pull you back by your cute little feathery feet, because you and I are supposed to be together. I can't be without you. And this is from, a professional animal communicator and somebody that's got decades of meditation and spiritual inquiry. And I've traveled to India. I've lived in an ashram. I really am devoted and dedicated to unfolding all aspects of what it means to be an embodied soul. And none of that has exempted me, not even for a minute, from the primal grief of losing the physical form of somebody that I love so, so much, to the point where for a few moments, a few days in my case, because it was so sudden and so shocking and so very much all the things that I absolutely was sure I wasn't going to be going through this time around, I did lose contact with him and I wasn't able to feel him. And it reminded me of my rather traditional, very traditional, actually, Southern Methodist upbringing. I'm trying to figure out how to say this politely. I was, very gently raised in the Christian tradition. It certainly was never forced down my throat, but it was a big part of our family life when I was growing up. And while I wouldn't necessarily say I resonate with so much of the trappings of that, I continue to resonate very strongly, very deeply with many of the very personal stories that Jesus shared. One of those stories is the story of when he heard that his friend Lazarus had died. And the first thing he did, now this is Jesus we're talking about. Like if I was Jesus, I would be heading right to the tomb, which happens to be a little grotto in our backyard where Pearl's adorable feathery body has been laid to rest. And there's a little plant on it and a little stone on top of it to protect it. And I would be heading out there ASAP to raise him from the dead. Trust me, I would. But Jesus wept first before he went and raised his friend Lazarus from the dead, and by which he called Lazarus's spirit back into his physical form. He cried first, and then he went and did the thing that he already knew he could do. And so I want to emphasize this because I have continued to cry. My mom has continued to cry. The outpouring of grief from our extended flock, many of you among them, the shock and the ripple effect, it moves us. And here in Houston, I have belonged to a gathering called Death Cafe for the last few years. I started attending about a year before COVID hit. I actually heard about Death Cafe from my dear friend Marcy, who is another one of the catastrophic recent losses that I've experienced. She very unexpectedly passed 6 days after I turned 50 on Christmas Eve. And one of the enduring gifts that Marcy brought into my life, and I'm talking, we were the human equivalent of me and Pearl. We talked every day on WhatsApp. We shared everything. And often what would happen is she would find a new book or a new hobby and share it with me, and then I would take it up. Or I would find a new book or a new endeavor yoga with Adrian Mishler, who's my online yoga teacher. I discovered yoga with Adrian, and soon Marcy was doing it too. She was in Florida and I was in Texas. And so we just shared everything. And so when Marcy discovered Death Cafe, I immediately wanted to see if there was a chapter here in Houston. And I know I'm probably a little odd that way. I have told multiple people that I attend a Death Cafe and have never once had anyone say to me, "Ooh, that sounds like fun. I'd love to join you for that." Mostly they're like, "Oh, I think I see somebody I know across the room," or "Is that my phone ringing?" or "Oh, shoot, looks like the dog needs to go out," and they're gone as quick as they came. But there was something about it. And I thought, yes, other than birth, death is like the one big thing that we all share in common. And I would really like to know more about it. And I had all these very specific kind of fears and just kind of insecurities. Like, I'm an introvert. If I get there and there's no personal space, how will I cope? This silly things. Maybe I was using humor to kind of distance myself from my genuine concerns about knowing so little about something that's such a big event that I know is going to happen in my life. But what I discovered when I started attending Death Cafe is that it's really all about coming alive. And here's a great story that has really helped serve as a compass and a guide for me, as especially over the last few months, as I became aware that Pearl's body was aging, his spirit was not. And if you follow us on Instagram, if you don't, you can find us at Love and Feathers and Shells. And if you watch his videos, especially the last few, they're just like the very first videos I ever took, except maybe better video quality. His soul was so fresh and full of life, and his body was unfortunately starting to show some signs of age. And so deep, deep, deep down underneath, where I didn't want to go when it came to my love, who I knew were life partners. And I knew there were signs of aging, that there were things that were causing him a little bit of a limited mobility, a little more insecurity. He was getting more anxious, but he never lost. Right to the very end, the night before he passed, he just wanted to play, and he got to spend a whole bunch of time with my mom, with his grandma. And, when I've shared this with my Death Cafe group, I loved what the organizer said. She said, she particularly has a background working for suicide hotlines. And she said, I discovered that when I was helping somebody in crisis, when I was keeping company with them, holding space for them on the phone, those were the times that I felt the most alive. And the truth is that over the last few months, especially, I have been making, without really realizing it, without really tuning into the deeper intuition that was probably trying to give me a little bit of a heads up, I had begun making much more of a practice of simply being present for Pearl, for Multi, for Io, my baby box turtle, for Flash, for the human animals I love in my life, to try to just, when I'm with them, to be present with them in each moment. And because I realized that these were the moments, the only moments in my life that I was going to miss when they were gone. These are the only moments in my life that really matter. These are the moments I wake up for. And each morning, every morning, reminds me of a movie that I love. It's really old school now, called Contact, with Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey. And in the movie, it's a little bit of a spoiler, so forgive me, but it's still so well worth watching. In the movie, near the end, Jodie Foster's sharing some insights she's learned from a journey she's taken, and she's saying, one of the things that I learned is that the only thing that makes the rest of this life bearable is each other. And I paraphrase a little bit. She probably said it more elegantly than I did, but I think about that a lot. So I really, if Pearl wanted to play, I would stop everything and I would play with him. And probably the biggest thing I've beaten myself up for is since he passed out of his physical form, is I've beaten myself up for not being as present that last day because I had stuff to do. I actually went to Death Cafe that day, and then I went thrifting, and I went and did some errands. And looking back, I realized that gave Pearl a good chunk of time to spend with my mom as well. And that was meaningful for him and for her. And I'm glad that they had that time, but I beat myself up because he wanted to play, he wanted to drop his sparkly parrot so I could pick it up. And I was rushing. So it's like, the more I just share that with you, number one, because if you've gone through any of those moments, I feel really sad when I'm saying it even. If you've gone through those moments where you just find that you're just kind of relentlessly unkind to yourself, it happens. It happens. Try not to get stuck there. When I get stuck in those moments, I shift my perspective and I reach out on the inside, just like that In Your Eyes song. It's another one, the Say Anything movie. Talk about old school. Totally worth watching with John Cusack, and he's, the movie In Your Eyes, and I reach out from the inside. That's the act of reaching out when there's no longer a physical form to connect with. We reach out on the inside, spirit to spirit, and I reach out on the inside, and Pearl shifts my perspective. And he says it worked out perfectly. There are some good pet grief support groups going now. I have a few colleagues that run grief support groups for pets. You can learn more about that on other episodes of the podcast. I think most of those episodes, there was one last season, and there have been a couple in seasons 1 and 2. And you can scroll back through and hopefully enjoy those episodes as well. But truthfully, most of the real work, and by that I mean growth, is an inside job, and it happens in those moments when we're not in a group. The value of going to a group, of being part of a group, is holding space for others who are grieving, allowing them to hold space for you, and then retaining the memory of the courage of your group members as you walk out again into the world without the one that you love. And you can think to yourself, if they can get through this and keep showing up for themselves, keep showing up for their life, keep showing up for me as I grieve, then I can get through this too. And I can keep showing up for myself, life, and for them. So that is the primal value of participating in some kind of grief support experience. But I truly believe that we still don't talk about pet grief nearly enough, because this is the most tender grief. This is the grief that hits us in our heart of hearts, in our soul of souls, because there's usually very little, if any, other stuff in between it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. We loved, we were loved. And that can feel like getting your drug supply suddenly cut off, and that drug is very addicting. Well, an experience like Death Cafe is not intended to be a grief support group. It's also not a death planning group, whether for pet death or for human death. In fact, I've written, there's a few blog posts recently where right the day before Pearl died, I posted a blog about pet death planning. So you can find that at animallovelanguages.com. And there's also a recent blog post that lists a whole bunch of grief support resources for pets at the same place. Just /blog will get you there. And I hope that will be helpful to you. But what Death Cafe has really given to me is a safe space to simply be present as a grieving human who is still all in to experience her life. And it's also given me a place to connect with others who perceive a difference. And I'm not going to say perceive the difference, because for some folks there is no difference, and I respect that. I'm certainly not the authority on what is factually true or what is possible or impossible in the subtle realms, but for me, it's given me a place to connect with others who perceive a difference between an embodied soul, and a soul that has departed their physical form. Let me explain what I mean by that. I know this can be kind of overwhelming, so if you need to pause the video or the audio podcast and come back to it, if you've had enough, I completely understand. We have to take these things in bite-sized pieces, but I'm just going to explain to you what I mean by that. And maybe it will help you connect some threads or some dots, if you will. It's maybe a better analogy in your own life with animal companions you've kept company with over the years. My pearl first came to me when I was 7, and he was a green and yellow parakeet named Perky. And I had spent the whole of my 6th year of life begging, pleading with my parents for a parrot. I wanted a parrot. I wanted a parrot the way my brother wanted a dog. I had fallen in love with birds. I write a lot more about that in our memoir of Life Together, Love and Feathers, What a Palm-Sized Parrot Has Taught Me About Life, Love, and Healthy Self-Esteem. And I wrote that when he was 15. Or actually, I started it when he was 11, and I finished it, I think, when he was 15. So it was quite a lie. I'm not a quick author. It takes me a long time usually to write the books that I write. But I had fallen in love with birds, and I just wanted a parrot in the worst way. And it took a year, but I was very persistent. And on my 7th birthday, we showed up at this private home, and I had no idea why we were there. And we walked in, and this woman I'd never seen before had a little green and yellow parakeet on her finger, and she handed him to me, and she said, "He's yours." And I was over the moon. I just can't even begin to tell you. And we were best friends from that point on. All of my if you've seen the movie Rio with the blue parrot, the blue macaw, and his human, you have a pretty good idea of what our life was like. We went everywhere together. We did everything together. If it was my birthday, it was Perky's birthday. He lived for 11 years. He passed while I was away at college. And Perky next came back to me as Jacob. Jacob was my first cockatiel. He came to me after I had been through college, had been working for a time, and keep in mind, I had turtles during this time. I had other parakeets, Polly and Wendell and Baby were also in my life and very special. But Perky was my soul bird. And I went through a period of time where I was doing a lot of recovery work, and I was traveling around the world, and I went to the ashram, and I went to Israel, and I did all kinds of different things. I went to Costa Rica and Croatia and Bosnia, and I went to Bulgaria, and I was creating music and founded a charity called Mentor Connect, and that was my resume as a disaster zone. But finally, I came back home to Houston and got a job and decided I was going to get another parrot. That's what I really, really wanted, to keep company with a parrot again. In fact, I changed all of my plans so that I could keep company with a parrot again, because that's what I really, really wanted. And I selected Jacob at a local parrots only store here in Houston that specialized in hand-raised baby parrots. And Jacob was a cockatiel. And he was just my everything, and I was his everything. I would rush home from work, and I wrote about this also in Love and Feathers, and be with him. And he was just the light of my life. Well, 3 years into it, 2 years into it, Jacob started getting really, really sick. And I spent that whole last year of his life rushing him to the vet. I had no idea what was wrong. Parrot medicine was not what it is today at that time. And come to find out, he had a congenital kidney failure. And when he died, it was the same exact scenario. I had a little more warning, but I was a lot less aware at that time in my life. And I woke up in the morning and found him and howled. It was the only other time in my life I have howled like that. I was inconsolable, and I absolutely, simply, and utterly refused. I said, I'm never going to do that again. And I've talked with some of you, my human clients, who also feel this way. I'm never going to do that again, ever. I can't do it again. That's how I felt. Luckily, my mom and dad felt differently. And it's a long story. It's a wonderful story how Pearl and I met, but I always found it curious that I could never feel Perky and Jacob around me, even after I started learning and honing my innate inborn abilities to communicate with animals. I never could feel, I could feel other animals that I'd kept company with, but not Perky and Jacob, and they were my soul birds. And one day I was talking with Pearl, and he just very calmly says, "You do know I was Jacob, right? And Perky." And I said to him, you could have told me a little earlier. So, there is this continuity. There are so many connecting points. Looking back now, I can see so many similarities and so many ways that Pearl has tried to show me who he was and who he is and who he always will be in my life. And he is my soul bird. He is my life companion. It's just his chosen physical forms, which are also the forms I most treasure, don't last as long as mine. And so he has to come and go, and he has to come and go. Now, does this provide tremendous and utter panacea of relief from grief? Is it an instant pain pill that takes it away? Absolutely not. And there are times I haven't been able to. We've had a lot of death, a lot of loss, even here in our little block where I now live with my mom. And after my dad passed, and then she had a really bad fall. And so I ended up moving in with her to kind of help out and be present for her as she turns 80 this year. And there's been a lot of death, a lot of grief, a lot of loss. And this is brave making stuff. And so I want to encourage you to honor what you're feeling and where you are with all of it. If you're struggling through grief right now, if you, like some of my treasured human clients, have unresolved grief that spans years or perhaps decades into your past, you just don't want to go there, you're afraid to touch the bear, so to speak, honor yourself. The depth of the grief or the inability to even go there with the grief, this is also the capacity that you have for courage, to be brave and to experience and discover the strength and the resilience that resides within you. And it takes time. And I love what, in addition to my work as an animal communicator and a Reiki master practitioner for animals and people, I also work and have worked for the last 10 years as a professional freelance writer, mostly in the pet niche. And one of my beautiful longtime writing clients, she shared something with me about finding little moments of joy, of peace, of relief. And I received that so profoundly. I felt that so profoundly, because that is how we do it. That's the only way it's done. We don't get through it as in get over it and we're done with it, but we walk this path that now includes this grief experience, choosing to focus our attention where it's needed in each moment and then not get stuck there. This is one of the great disciplines of life. And it circles back to that story I promised I would tell you earlier in this very same podcast and then forgot to tell you. And that story is simply this. There was a man who, and this takes place in India. So there was a man who was a seeker. He wanted to know God. He wanted to know his own self. He wanted to know his spirit. And he wanted to feel that connectiveness between, if we're all one, then why can't I feel that? Why can't I feel God? And so he heard of a great king who was also said to be a great yogi, a great renunciant, a great spiritual teacher or guru, as they say in India. And so he visited this king. And when he arrived, there was an incredible party going on. Everybody was out celebrating, wearing their finery, eating, drinking. There were lots of activities for people of all ages. And at the center of it all was this king who was just dripping in wealth and jewels and wives and all of the good stuff. And so this poor guy, this seeker, he looks at this king and he thinks, this is the guy I've been told to go see. Like, are we kidding here? This is about as far from spiritual as I can imagine. And yet he was already there. So he figured, well, I might as well just go ahead and ask. So this kind of festive day, it was kind of a free for all, ask me anything. He walked up and he told the courtier, he said, I want to ask the king a question. And when he got his chance, he said, I want to know how to feel God. I want to know how to live a good life. I want to realize myself, by which he meant his spirit self. I can't feel anything. Can you teach me? And the king responded with something that you're going to kind of probably receive with a bit of shock. He said, now look, I want you to balance this cup of water on your head. And I want you to walk through the whole town, which is full of festivities and celebration. And my guards are going to be walking behind you, and they're going to be carrying these really long, sharp swords. And if a single drop of water spills out of that cup while you're walking through the village, I'm going to tell them to cut your head off. Well, this guy was stuck now. He put himself in the hot seat, and the only thing for it was to try very hard not to spill the water out of the cup. So he took a deep breath, put the cup on top of his head, and started walking. And he managed to get all the way to the other end of the village without spilling a drop of water. And he went back to the king and he said, now, what the heck was that for? And the king said, what were you thinking about while you were walking the village with that cup? And he said, I was thinking about the cup and the water and not spilling it. The king said, did you look to the left or the right? Did you notice the festivities? Were you distracted in any way? And the guy said, oh gosh, no, absolutely not. The only thing I was focusing on was each next step and making sure that the cup stayed sturdy and full of water on top of my head. And the king said, that's your answer. Focus on each moment. Focus on the spirit in each moment. Focus on who you are in each moment. Don't look to the left. Don't look to the right. Don't allow your attention to be pulled here, there, and everywhere. This is how you renounce, so-called renounce. Pull your spirit back from the attachment to the things and the people and even the beings of this world and into your own self. You could feel that all of life is right here, right now. This is all we have. A simpler, shorter story is another one of my favorites is St. Francis of Assisi, the saint of the animals, was asked one day, if this was your last day on earth, what would you do? And St. Francis reportedly answered, well, I would probably weed the garden because that's what needs doing today. This is so beautiful. Again, it's about being present for each moment in our lives. You know, when you're present for your animal today, in each moment, it doesn't mean you're not going to be grieving wholeheartedly when their physical body is no longer viable and their spirit has to depart. But it does mean that so many of those self-recriminations, like the ones I shared with you earlier, and regrets that you maybe missed out, they won't be there. Because you have that authenticity, that integrity, and you know that you were there, and you don't regret a moment of the time that you spent with them. And I also want to encourage you that you can seek, you can reach out from the inside. Go listen to that song. Go listen to the Say Anything theme song and consider how it might apply to your pet's continued presence in spirit in your life. Yes, their body may not be with you, or you may be shepherding them through their end of life process right now. You may be in pet hospice with them, or you may just be getting a subtle inkling. that all is not well and you're kind of looking forward and going, I don't know what to do, how to prepare. Well, the first thing you do is stop doing and be, and start breathing and be present and consider, where do I feel my bond? What part of me knows? And because I feel in a way that my mind can't talk me out of, that I love and I am loved. That connection cannot be broken by the death, the breakdown and the death of a physical body. It can't be broken. If you want to learn more about that, I want to encourage you to head over to animallovelanguages.com/free tools. There is a new free 30-day intuitive pet parent journey that can help guide you, that can help you center in each moment, in small moment to moment to moment. I'm not talking about closing down your schedule so you can spend 24/7 with your pet just eye gazing. That would probably freak them out anyway, but I am talking about just putting into practice a discipline of when you are with them and you have time to have dedicated time to be with them. Just be with them. Heart to heart, just feeling, where in me do I feel an unbreakable connection, supported by and authenticated by this feeling of love, of unconditional love. And that is going to be your anchor and your lifeline. So I'm going to stop there because I've already talked a lot longer than I expected to. But we will continue this discussion. It just feels like the discussion that needs to be offered, if you will. So many of my individual animal communication sessions are for pets in spirit. It's the number one request. And more than a few of my human clients tell me they don't really have anyone else to talk with about it. And so if that describes you, I want you to know you do have somebody to talk with about it, me. I want you to know that I am here to support you. And I want to thank you for all the messages of love and support and condolences and empathy that you have sent to me. They are treasured. I know I haven't responded. I've been a little slow, which is not like me, but I just want to say thank you so very, very much for this most precious of gifts. You have my heart. So I hope you have enjoyed and benefited from this episode of Let's Talk to Animals. We're doing these every 2 weeks here in 2023 for season 4. So I can just carve out a little bit more time, devote a little bit more time to developing each episode and kind of dig down a little bit deeper into what we talk about here. And always love to hear from you. Please consider liking, subscribing, doing the things that help a little podcast like this one to survive and thrive. And I will see you in 2 weeks here on Let's Talk to Animals. Okay.